We're here in Indianapolis on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo. We're going to talk about our discussions and the things that we got to talk to Steelers GM Omar Khan about. He went all over the place, from the NFL draft class, from the Steelers' plans with free agency, with maybe some current Steelers on the roster. There was a lot discussed. We'll break it all down right here on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Carter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined by Steelers beat writer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Ray Fittipaldo. Both of us are in Indianapolis in separate hotel rooms right now, but we had the opportunity to speak with Steelers GM Omar Khan before the NFL scouting combine. And Ray, this is Omar Khan's first full draft process. And everyone needs to know the draft process starts way back last year in late spring, early summer, when they're starting to look at, okay, who's still on these teams, what's the opinions of these guys, building them into the college season, watching them play out their college years, and then all up to this point where we're about to start watching some of these athletes put on drills, put up times, numbers, all these stats that we're going to see, measurements. This is a whole process he's going through, and I thought it was very interesting for Omar Khan to kind of detail it the way that he did about his role and the roles of the people around him in the Steelers front office now that Kevin Colbert is gone.
Yeah, I mean, Andy Weidl, the assistant GM, of course, is going to run the draft board. And, I thought it was interesting. He mentioned Cole Marco, who is the new quote-unquote cap guy. And, Omar said he's kind of relinquished some of the contract negotiation and salary cap duties to Cole. And Cole is a 2013 graduate of Dartmouth. I don't know if he played with Danny Rooney, but the connection there with Dartmouth is Buddy Teevens is the head coach there. And, of course, Buddy Teevens gave Omar his first ever job in football way back, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s. So there's a trust there. And I'm sure Cole is going to do great at his new job. So it only goes to say, right, Omar came up as this cap guru, this cap specialist, but as he takes on these new duties and these new responsibilities as the GM, he's going to have to sort of delegate some. And, certainly Andy running the board and Cole taking over some of the cap duties, that certainly plays into it.
Absolutely. And before we get into Andy Weidl's whole position in running the board, I also thought it was interesting how Omar Khan talked about when we asked him about the salary cap situation and him comparing it to what the Steelers were going through during the COVID years when the cap was lowered. And he was like, it seemed like he was expressing relief for what the Steelers were dealing with. And I know some people, some fans might look up on like websites like Over the Cap and Spot Rack and be like, they only have $81,000 in cap space right now. How is that a good thing? But I think it's because they know that the Steelers are going to be able to and willing to make some moves to create the cap space needed to make the moves that they're going to make when free agency starts to open up.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the big move is William Jackson. I think he's a $12.2 million cap hit. He'll come off the books. We're just speculating on other players now, but, you could save $4 million with Ahkello Witherspoon. That would get you up to 16.2. You could save $2 million if you don't want to keep Gunnar Olszewski. So boom, right there, that's $18.2 million. And I'm sure there's others too, that we can get into that are possibilities. So and I'm paraphrasing here, but I think Omar said the cap would not be a hindrance this year. They can do pretty much whatever they want, sign their own pending free agents. And it seems like if there's a player out there that really intrigues them and they want to make a move, they'd be able to do that as well.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like to me as well. The Steelers are in a position where some people might think like, oh, they're hamstrung a little bit because they're paying TJ Watt, they're paying Minkah Fitzpatrick, they're paying Cam Hayward, but they're not. And again, this is something that you and I have talked about, the ability to maneuver and create opportunities in the roster when you're not paying a franchise quarterback, and you have your starting quarterback on a rookie deal, I think that's where that's where the Steelers recognize that they are, and they're going to be able to make some moves there. But let's talk more about Andy Weidl's role, because when Omar Khan says he's running the draft board, you and I know what that means. But help explain to our listeners what that means as far as how the board, how the draft room operates, who what is the board, and who makes the ultimate decisions with that board come draft day.
So with Kevin Colbert, and he was the GM for basically 23 years, his expertise came in personnel and in scouting. So, of course, for all those years, Kevin was the one who was running the draft board. Now, Omar Khan comes in while he is starting to get into scouting and, has some of that on his resume. He came up as a cap guy, and he was kind of on the number side of things. And Andy, who has known Omar for a long time, Andy also came up on the scouting side. So it's GM versus assistant GM. And what we talk about when we say he's going to set the board is Andy is going to grade every single player in this draft. So they'll have 1 through 300 whatever ranked on their board, and they'll come when it's time to pick it at number 17. They'll cross the guys off who have been picked, and then they'll have to make a call on which player they're going to take at 17. So that's kind of what we're talking about with Andy. He's more of the personnel scout guy in this operation. And, Omar, of course, is the well-rounded guy who came up in the Steelers and kind of has his hands in everything. So, Andy is a guy who's done this before. He ran 3 boards in Philadelphia. I think it was 2019. No, it was 2020, 2021, and 2022. And, of course, we all know what happened with the Eagles this year after a down season or two. They were right back in the Super Bowl again. So Andy obviously knows what he's doing there when it comes to the draft.
And that's where the Steelers were very excited to add him on board. And, and I think everyone started wondering, well, if Andy Weidl's running the board, does this mean you're about to see a lot of answers in those trenches? Because we know that he found answers for the Eagles in those trenches, being able to get defensive linemen, offensive linemen, finding guys that help them control the line of scrimmage to get them that Super Bowl berth this year. I'm sure a lot of Steelers fans have talked about needs, but Omar Khan also talked about his opinions on the draft class. Ray, we're going to talk about that in just a minute here, because I think it further adds to the perspective of how the Steelers are approaching this draft class versus maybe some different ones in recent history. We'll talk about that in a minute, along with some of the free agent possibilities and current Steelers on the roster who Omar Khan talked about on Tuesday at the NFL Scouting Combine. All of that in a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at Valley Pool and Spa. Valley Pool and Spa, of course, is the place that you go to get a spa, a sauna, or a hot tub, or a Finleo sauna, which I've talked about several times on this show, about how if you want a way to de-stress, to get used to get back out into the day and feel refreshed, the best way to do it is to get a sauna installed right in your home, especially one of those Finleo saunas. And Valley Pool and Spa is going to help you not only figure out what's the best one for you, but how to get it into your home, how to install it, and make it something that you can enjoy every day that you want to, so that you're getting out and attacking your days but the best way, totally refreshed. So the best way to do that is to go to valleypoolspa.com, where you can save big now on all their in-stock hot tubs, swim spas, and saunas at valleypoolspa.com. That's valleypoolspa.com. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I'm Chris Carter, here with Steelers beat writer Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, Omar Khan said that he thought that this draft class was very good. And here's the thing. GMs often say that, right? Like that wasn't a thing there. But I think that one thing he said is that it's very strong in a lot of positions, in almost all positions that you could possibly have of need. And I just think that with the Steelers, we've seen them in positions where, like last year, they wanted to get a quarterback. The year before that, they really wanted to get a running back. This year, there are so many needs that it's going to be tough for me to be able to say, like, oh, yeah, they're definitely going in this direction, especially with the first round pick. I think that Omar Khan, even though it was kind of not saying a lot, I think that the point being that I kind of read between the lines was, listen, like there's a lot of really good groups out here, which means there's a lot of options and pathways on the table for the Steelers to take, and they're not necessarily focusing in on one or two on how especially day one of the draft could break out.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's a great year to have 4 picks in the top 81 and 3 in the top 49 because it's a very deep draft at positions of Steelers needs. Now, he also did say that they have the draft capital, so they could make a move if they wanted to trade one of those picks to move up. They would be able to do that. There's also been a lot of speculation, Chris, where this is such a deep draft that you could trade down. You could possibly trade 32 or 49 and move back and get multiple picks in rounds 2 and 3. So, listen, Omar Khan saying we're open for business. Every GM says that now. They want every other team to know that, they're willing to make a deal. But I tend to think with the depth of this draft being what it is, I think they would be fine picking 17, 32, 49, and 81 and getting potentially 4 guys who could help you, if not right away, then certainly help you at some point during their rookie seasons.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, and we talked about that because you wrote about what Daniel Jeremiah we saw, and there's a potential to get 4 starters with those first 4 picks. And if the Steelers were able to nail a draft like that, what could that do for a Steelers roster that's already young and trying to find starters who will alleviate the need to spend big on certain positions just to get players who kind of hold the line at those positions instead of getting studs at those positions where maybe if they hit on some of those rookie deals they can use more of that money in the future to go out and get maybe some bigger name free agents out there or pay to keep more of the guys that they want to keep in the long term. That's a lot of what the Steelers are trying to do right now, so I thought that was very interesting from Omar Khan. But he also talked about some of the guys that are on the roster or could be free agents, and the top one that everyone's concerned about right now is, of course, Cameron Sutton. Cameron Sutton set to be an unrestricted free agent, but he did indicate Steelers did seem to want to bring him in, and there's been some movement there. What was your thoughts on the way that he addressed the Cam Sutton question?
Yeah, so he was asked twice about it, and when he was asked about it again, the second time, I think that's when he said that he feels very good about where they're at in those negotiations. So that would seem to bode well, right? The last time Cam Sutton was in this position was before the 2021 season. They got that deal done during the legal tampering period. So that was done, I think, 2 or 3 days before free agency started. So in essence, Cam really didn't get the free agency. Now, he might have been talking to other teams and kind of had some feelers out there about what he might be able to make from other teams, but he made that decision before he went on the open market to come back to the Steelers for $9 million over 2 years. Now we're in a totally different situation now, right? I mean, he started 31 games over the last 2 years. He's their best cornerback. He's their most versatile defensive back, and he's their smartest player. They can put him in any position, and he's going to go out there and do well. So his price tag has gone up. I think it's probably in the $10 million range. I wouldn't be surprised if they signed him for like 30 million over 3 years, something like that. But yeah, I think you're right. Cam Sutton, Larry Ogunjobi, those are the 2 big guys I think they want to get done here before free agency gets here.
Do you think that Larry Ogunjobi does get signed? Because he was an $8 million 1-year deal this past year. He dealt with injuries for a while. That one seems like, if they're able to, get the William Jackson deal off the board, Kelly Witherspoon, Gunnar Olszewski. And then, of course, when we were talking about the numbers that they were opening up, you didn't even mention, what they could do with restructuring and how much space they can open up with that. Right. Is that something where they should go get a Larry Ogunjobi who's going to cost them a bit, or should they be looking in this draft class to be like, hey, let's just find the next guy that's going to play next to Cam Hayward and eventually be the next Cam Hayward?
Yeah, I mean, even if you get that guy early, let's say you get that guy at 17 or 32, Chris, I don't know that you want to rush him. So I think it would be, listen, if Larry Ogunjobi's health, if they feel comfortable with that, I think it makes all the sense in the world to bring him back for, 1 year, $9 million this year, right? I mean, just somebody that has that placeholder so that next guy isn't rushed into a situation where he has to play right away. So to me, Cam Sutton is number one because you don't have any issues like health, right? I
Right.
mean, he's we failed to mention he's a very durable guy too.
Mm-hmm.
Injuries haven't been an issue, at least not in the past 2 seasons. So, I think Ogunjobi is number two, but I will concede that they kind of nursed him along every single week, especially late in the season. He didn't practice a whole heck of a lot. You can go back and look at the injury reports. He was held out of practice multiple days each week. So
Mm-hmm.
they got to feel comfortable with that aspect of it. But if they do, I think it makes all the sense in the world to bring him back for another year. I wouldn't do I wouldn't do a 3-year deal with him, right? But I think it makes all the sense in the world to bring him back, and then yes, draft a young guy, get that next young five technique, your next young Cam Hayward, get that guy in this draft if you can, either number 17 or number 32.
That could be, I think, really big for the Steelers. I also thought it was very interesting the way that Omar Khan, that is, addressed the question of Alex Highsmith. Now, Alex Highsmith isn't a restricted or unrestricted free agent. He still has one more year on his deal. But of course, he just had a double-digit sack season. He's steadily grown each year with the Steelers. And, he did get to talk about, the potential of keeping, an Alex Highsmith around. And it seemed like, he was I couldn't tell if it was just straight up like, hey, yeah, of course we'd love to keep him, but we don't know how things are going to play out. To me, Ray, it sounds like they're still trying to figure out what the negotiating table for that is going to even look like. But there's definitely both sides. We want to make this work type of situation there. It just means that they haven't begun those talks yet.
Yeah, and listen, they what they typically do is they want to get through free agency. They want to get through the draft, and then you saw last season. Last year was relatively early for them to sign Minka. I think they signed Minka in June, but typically they'll sign, those guys who are in the last year of their contracts. They'll get those done in July or August sometime. So Alex Highsmith is a natural, 14 and a half sacks last season. He's an up-and-coming player, as Omar said today. So, yes, it certainly is in their history. If you go back and look at it, when they have good players, when they draft and develop those players, they like to sign them to second and third contracts. And I think Alex Highsmith is next up on the docket.
I think it's going to be very interesting. If they can lock him up with TJ Watt, they could potentially have the best edge rushing duo in the NFL for several years. And then if they find a good third option in free agency or in the NFL draft, it could make for the pass rush that the Steelers have been trying to establish and maintain over the past several years. Heck, they led the NFL in sacks for 5 straight seasons until this year when TJ Watt missed half the season. I'd be very intrigued to see how they're able to build it if they can keep Alex Highsmith as a part of it. But there's another Steeler who a lot of people have been assuming wasn't going to be around anymore that Omar Khan mentioned, and that was the backup quarterback, Mitch Trubisky. I want to get Ray's thoughts on what was said about Mitch Trubisky and what it might mean for the Steelers roster and their salary cap in the coming year. But first, before we do anything else, we got to talk to you guys about Yinzers in the Berg, one of our great sponsors that offers you the best Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more. Yinzers, listen up. If you're a Steelers fan, a Pirates fan, a Penguins fan, or a Pitt fan, you can get all your Pittsburgh sports apparel right at one location, and that's Yinzers in the Berg. They have 2 stores in the Strip District that you can visit at any time. But if you can't get to the Strip District, just go to their website, yinzerspgh.com. You go to yinzerspgh.com, you'll see their merchandise that updates every single week with the best Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more available to you at all times. And again, when you go to Yinzers in the Berg, you'll find the best stuff, not just for yourself, but for any friend or loved one who's a big Pittsburgh sports fan. So get to Yinzers in the Berg right now and visit their website, yinzerspgh.com. That's yinzerspgh.com for all your Pittsburgh sports apparel. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter. Ray Fittipaldo here with us. Ray, Omar Khan addressed the Mitch Trubisky situation because it's kind of been assumed that something had to happen there because he's like a $10 million cap hit on the Steelers right now. And if they were to cut him, they get $8 million back, and that'd be another significant chunk of money that they could throw into the free agency, whether to keep Cam Sutton, to bring back Larry Ogunjobi, to go get somebody else. But Omar Khan seemed suggestive as like, we really liked what Mitch Trubisky brought to the table and talked about a future in Pittsburgh. Was that kind of just like a red herring? Was that just like something that was thrown out there? Or do you think that that's a real thing that the Steelers might try to find a way to keep Mitch Trubisky? And if they do, what does that do for their salary concerns?
Yeah. So, I mean, based off what Art Rooney II said, what is that, a month ago now, we knew the Steelers liked Mr. Trubisky. They wanted to have him back. What this would suggest, if you read between the lines, is you mentioned the salary cap. He's $8 million salary for the season, but he's a $10.2 million cap hit. So when Omar says we'd like to have him with us beyond the 2023 season, then you go to think, okay, extension. Let's sign him for another 2 to 3 years. Obviously, he wouldn't be playing for $8 million a year over the life of that contract, but you can tack that extension on. Maybe you get that down, Chris, to a $6 million cap hit. And I think maybe the Steelers would be able to live with that. And, he mentioned today the value of having a veteran quarterback.
Yes, he did.
As a backup when you have a quarterback like Kenny Pickett on a rookie contract. And that's the same model that the Steelers had with Ben Roethlisberger. They had Byron Leftwich. They had Charlie Batch for a lot of years. And they only changed that really when Ben was in his late 20s, early 30s. You saw that transition from, I think Batch left after 2012, 2013.
I think 2013 was his last year, right?
And then they had Landry Jones come in, and
yeah,
Gradkowski was there for a year or two. And then at that point, they started to draft younger guys. Josh Dobbs came, so on and so forth. So that's kind of, that would be a very Steelers thing to do. Get that veteran in here with a quarterback on his rookie contract. And, listen, I mean, Omar said it today. He's been a pro's pro ever since he's got here, right? I mean, everything that happened last year, losing his starting job, he never became a distraction. I think the guy is a good teammate, and I think, I want to say dollar for dollar, but maybe not because his contract is a little bit high right now. But just based off of, just talent, I think he's one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL. And I think you could spell that out looking what he did when he had to come in late in the season for Kenny Pickett.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. He came in filling in for that Tampa Bay Buccaneers win, came in and started throughout the Panthers game, got them, and helped get them that win. I mean, certainly, I think that he's definitely one of the better backups in the NFL. And like you said, when you have a quarterback who's young, still figuring out how to protect himself at the NFL speed, that's very valuable. And Omar Khan even referenced the playoffs. He's like, yeah, you look at what happened there. And of course, everyone knows the 49ers went down to their fourth string quarterback. So, just at least having two quarterbacks that you're very confident in is important in today's NFL to protect your guys and protect your offense so that you can still function when your top guy goes down. And there's value there. And I know that, I'm on the train that I'm on the train that, you don't want to pay too much for backup quarterbacks because there's so many important needs across the roster. But especially right now, I do think backup quarterback is a good thing to secure as long as you're not paying too much for it. I do wonder how low can the Steelers get that contract down in negotiations as far as a cap hit for this year if they're able to extend him. Because if you're Mitch Trubisky, maybe you feel you could be a starter somewhere. But frankly, Ray, I'm starting to see more and more. There are so many teams that are just kind of learning hey, why are we doing the Sam Darnold thing again? Why are we bringing in the guy that didn't work anywhere else and thinking that we're going to revive this guy's career? And if you're Mitch Trubisky and you're making really good money on an organization that likes you and you like them and there's mutual respect there, and you would have the chance to still pop in occasionally, I think it makes a ton of sense for him to want to stay, especially, he's been with the Bears. He's seen turmoil. He was a backup to Josh Allen. That was cool and all, but I think it makes sense for both sides to want to come to the table and say, hey, let's keep Mitch here longer, but also let's make sure Mitch gets a payday for it, just not one that crushes the Steelers' chances to add more parts of the roster.
Yeah, Mitch is 27, 28, so he's going to have to work through his mind during this offseason. Yeah. Okay, I am no longer a starter. I am a backup. I mean, that has to be
That's
part of
tough.
this. That's part of the thought process.
Yeah.
However uncomfortable that might be, he's going through that right now. But let's go back to the playoffs and what you said. And Omar referenced this today.
Mm-hmm.
Of the final four teams, right? Philadelphia, San Francisco, Kansas City, and Cincinnati. The Bengals were the only team that didn't have quarterback injury issues late in the season or in the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
Jalen Hurts was banged up late in the season. He
He
missed, what, 2 or
was.
3 games? He came
Mm-hmm.
back for the playoffs. We all know what happened in that 49ers playoff game. And Patrick Mahomes was beat up in the playoffs.
He was.
He was beat up in the Super Bowl. People didn't know what was going to happen after halftime after he tweaked that ankle. So I think it's the way of the world with mobile quarterbacks now. They're out of the pocket more. Athletic defensive linemen and edge rushers are after them more, so there's more of a chance that they could get dinged up. So I just think that's where we are in the NFL right now, and I think a backup quarterback is as important as it's ever been.
I agree. I agree with you. It is very important. And again, Kenny Pickett, had two stints in the concussion protocol last year. So the Steelers, they're going to want to maybe protect their offense in that moment. They want to protect their quarterback, but they also want to protect the functioning of their offense in some of those games. And again, Mitch Trubisky, outside of that Ravens game, where he threw 3 interceptions, he was very good at protecting the football and fitting the bill of, hey, I'm not trying to go out here and just win the game by myself, but I'm out here trying to help you win the game by being a good leader on the field who manages the game, makes the right decisions, and keeps yourself ahead of the sticks. And certainly, as a guy who also knows the offense now, that's another asset to have alongside with you as you're going along things. So all those different things I thought were fascinating to learn from Omar Khan, just to kind of see more glimpses at how this is going to play out here. My last question to you, Ray, is going with this combine back to the Andy Weidl question. Is this going to be a matter of we should just start looking towards the big guys, or are the Steelers last year Mike Tomlin had wings with Malik Willis and that story broke out, and then everyone was like, well, the Steelers are just going to pick Malik Willis. They're just going to pick Malik Willis, and then it was they went to Kenny Pickett. Do you think there's a sort of rope-a-dope or a situation where the Steelers have maybe a plan out there that they're waiting to spring on people come draft day, whether it's a position, a trade, something along the lines that could catch us off guard?
Listen, building up the trenches certainly is Andy Weidl's wheelhouse. I mean, he has that background in Baltimore, and he had that background in Philadelphia, but it didn't always come early in the draft. If you look at 2 of the 3 drafts he ran in Philadelphia, Chris, Jalen Reagor was a first-round pick one of the years.
Mm-hmm.
Devontae Smith was a first-round pick another of those years. So he picked 2 receivers, or he didn't pick. I'm sorry. Howie Roseman did the picking, but the board was set up in such a way that receivers came before offensive linemen in those situations. Now, last year he does get Cam Jurgens, I think in the 2nd or 3rd round. He's the likely replacement for Jason Kelce if Jason Kelce retires. So, that's one thing that, if there's a criticism of Kevin Colbert late in his tenure, he didn't go out and get those next starters, right? Late in his tenure, right? They just kind of let the O-line deteriorate to a point where it was beyond repair, and they had to start getting guys in there. So, I think Andy's reputation certainly is in building up the offensive and defensive lines, but you have to be careful. The board is going to be the board. They're going to pick the best players available at 17 and 32. And if there's better depth in the O-line, especially on the interior, 49 at 81, they could build up their offensive line in that way too. So don't get hung up on it has to be an O-lineman at 17 or 32. It doesn't have to be. Yes, at some point in this draft, the Steelers will upgrade on defensive line. They will upgrade on offensive line, not only because of Andy Weidl, because they have needs at those positions.
I agree with you there, Ray. It's going to be a fun process to cover. I'm excited to see what happens at the Combine. This is the Wednesday episode of the North Shore Drive podcast, which means as you're listening to this or watching this, The guys, we've been talking to players. Players are getting out there, showing coaches what they can do, and then it's going to start changing. Everyone's boards out there. Who goes where? What player confirms, their athleticism, or surprises us, whether for the good or the bad. It's all going to play out, and you can catch all of that coverage at Post-Gazette.com if you want to keep up with all the relevant news on the Steelers draft process and how they follow the combine. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo. Jerry Dulek's also out here. We're out here in force with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, covering the combine every day. So check that out at post-gazette.com. Ray, thanks so much for joining me, and thank you, listeners and viewers, for checking us out here in the North Shore Drive podcast. Remember, subscribe to this channel to get all of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette sports content. It comes out daily. This show comes out Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, which means we will have a Friday episode for you before we leave from the combine, just our reactions to some of the things that we saw and maybe some of the other things that we've heard. But it's going to be a process, so stick with us. We're going to keep covering it right here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We'll see you here on the Friday episode of the North Shore Drive podcast. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.